As evening fell, Sean Smith put his terrier Spike on a leash and took him outside, just as he always did. The dog looked gratefully at the owner and began to circle around him, jumping up and down and trying to lick his cheek. "Hush, hush. You're going to fall, you goof," Sean said, laughing, and patted the dog on the scruff of the neck. Then, holding Spike by the leash, he headed towards the city park, where the dog could chase the ubiquitous squirrels and pigeons, walking importantly along the shady alleys. But before Sean had time to walk even half a mile, he saw a woman on the left side of Main Street, carrying a baby stroller in her hands. To the man's surprise, the woman was unsuccessfully trying to carry the big stroller into the house. She looked extremely clumsy, and it didn't seem to be working out. At the sight of this touching scene, Sean experienced a feeling of pity and compassion, which caused a disturbing tingling in his heart. This reaction was explained by the fact that it was just a week ago, Sean and his wife Rachel buried their newborn daughter. Unfortunately, the baby was born prematurely, and despite all the doctor's efforts, she couldn't get stronger, which is why she had virtually no chance of recovery. Obviously, Sean and Rachel were devastated. This kind of tragedy isn't something one can quickly recover from. Therefore, when he saw a lonely woman with a child, Sean felt the same aching feeling that he had first experienced while holding his newborn daughter in his arms. Meanwhile, the stranger still couldn't get the stroller inside the house. Of course, Sean couldn't just continue watching the woman struggle, so he rushed to the rescue, together with his dog Spike. "Hello, miss. Can I help you with that?" Sean asked, and without waiting for an answer, took the edge of the stroller. Meanwhile, the loyal dog sat quietly by the house and didn't even try to run away. "Oh, thank you, sir. I would have never been able to get it inside on my own," the young mother said with relief when the stroller was finally in the living room. "Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to feel like a father again," Sean answered with a smile. The stranger nodded understandingly in response and started complaining that raising her daughter alone was extremely difficult. "God, what a coincidence. She's also has a girl. And the baby seems the same age as our Molly would be now," Sean thought bitterly, but of course he didn't say it out loud. As it turned out, the stranger's name was Megan Miller, and her little daughter was named Hannah. Looking at the carefree baby, Sean experienced an irresistible desire to pick her up and hold her to his chest. Megan caught the man's gaze and, as if reading his thoughts, said, "You can hold Hannah if you want to. She's a very calm baby and won't mind being held by a nice man." That was enough for Sean. He quickly, but with great care, took the baby out of the stroller. At that moment, a small golden cross fell from under Hannah's onesie. It was an elaborate tiny replica of a crucifix with the baby Jesus and a tiny M engraved on its back. The little thing surprised Sean so much that he immediately turned pale and changed in his face. Meanwhile, little Hannah smiled toothlessly and looked at the man with her cute beady eyes, trying to touch his face with her tiny hands. "Is something wrong, sir?" Megan asked sympathetically. Sean could hardly explain what was happening to him at that very moment. The fact was that the man recognized the cross that was hanging on little Hannah's neck. Moreover, according to his wife, there couldn't be a second cross that looked exactly like that because it was custom made many years ago. But the most shocking part for the man was that his little Molly was buried wearing exactly the same kind of cross just recently. Having finally gotten a hold of himself, Sean asked, "Where did you get this cross?" "Oh, I hardly can give a definite answer to your question, sir. I've had this thing since I was little. I spent my childhood at an orphanage. The caretaker said that this cross was a gift from my mother, so then I passed it along to my daughter when she was born." "And what does it matter?" Megan asked worriedly. Having heard the woman's story, Sean felt weak at the knees. He handed Hannah over to her mother and warily sank into a chair. Lost in conjecture, the man didn't know how to find the right words to tell Megan what was going on in his head. The fact was that his wife Rachel, just like Megan, was an orphan. But how did Megan get this cross? Realizing that the best thing in this case would be to tell the truth, Sean shared his thoughts with Megan and then invited her to come over for dinner. Well, that's definitely a mystery. Okay, I'll come by after 6. Just don't think anything bad about me. Trust me, I'm very sorry what happened to your daughter. But I really don't know the true story behind this cross, said Megan, seeing the guest off to the door. At the same time, the woman got a feeling that she was one step away from unraveling the mystery that shrouded her past. Therefore, when Megan and Hannah came to have dinner with the Smiths, her heart was literally jumping out of her chest with excitement. Of course, Rachel already knew why the single mother was coming over for dinner, and therefore she was ready to provide her with all kinds of help and assistance. But when Rachel saw the cross hanging around Hannah's neck with her own eyes, her surprise knew no bounds. The fact was that the little thing turned out to be an exact copy of the cross she wore around her neck in her childhood. At the same time, despite the fact that Rachel was the same age as Megan, she was sure that she hadn't seen this woman before, and even more so, they definitely didn't grow up at the same orphanage. But then, when Rachel took a closer look at the cross, she noticed that there actually were some differences. This is definitely a different cross. Mine had the letter R in the circle engraved on its back, and this one has the letter M on it, Rachel exclaimed, amazed at her own discovery. Megan looked at the lady of the house in surprise, and then suggested that the letters M and R could be the initials of their names. To the chagrin of the three of them, this discovery didn't bring them any closer to unraveling the mystery behind the golden crosses, which for some unknown reason turned out to be in possession of the two orphan women. What if we turn it to a private detective? I actually know one. Sean was the first one to break the silence. Rachel and Megan liked this idea so much that the women unanimously expressed their approval. Therefore, without putting it off, Sean, Rachel, and Megan went to see a private detective the next morning. Of course, in order to provide qualified services, Detective Fred Nelson had to remove the golden cross from the neck of little Hannah and examine it very thoroughly. Don't expect any results for at least a week, okay? The detective said in a tone that brooked no objections. Fred Nelson was impatient to quickly get down to business, which in his own opinion promised to be very confusing but also interesting. Unfortunately, it took much longer for the detective to figure out this case than he initially expected. All this time, Megan, Rachel, and Sean had been eagerly waiting for news from Mr. Nelson, who dived headlong into investigating this mysterious case. Therefore, when the private detective finally invited them to come in, their joy knew no bounds. As it turned out, Fred Nelson did a lot of digging and managed to find out a lot of interesting things. Of course, first of all, he talked about the golden crosses, which really did have the initials of the two women engraved on them. Your mother gave these crosses to her daughters, added Mr. Nelson, and looked meaningfully at both women. So, what's going on? Are Rachel and I sisters? Megan exclaimed, having difficulty handling her excitement. The detective smiled in response and began his story. As it turned out a little later, Fred Nelson had another trick up his sleeve, which came as an even bigger surprise to the confused trio. The truth was that their mother actually had 3 crosses custom made for her. What do you mean 3? Then who has the 3rd cross? Sean asked, whose head was already spinning from all these riddles and secrets. Fortunately, the truth turned out to be much simpler than it seemed at first glance. According to Fred Nelson, who personally sought out the jeweler, the client who ordered the custom crosses was a woman named Miranda Harris. 25 years ago, she gave away all her family jewelry in order to leave something special for her 3 children. As it turned out, Miranda Harris was dating the son of some wealthy businessman when she got pregnant and gave birth to triplets, 2 girls and a boy. Miranda came from a poor family, and unfortunately, the father of her children left Miranda immediately after their birth. Thus, at the age of 20 years, the unfortunate woman was left alone to raise 3 babies. It's hard to even imagine what Miranda had to go through before she realized that she couldn't provide for her children on her own. Being unable to figure out a way out of this dreadful situation, Miranda fell into a deep depression, which was very difficult to get out of. Then, guided by her instincts, Miranda Harris decided to place the 3 children in different orphanages, giving each of them a small golden cross as a keepsake. "Do Megan and I really have a mother and a brother?" Rachel exclaimed excitedly. The private detective shook his head evasively in response, making it clear that it wasn't so simple. As it turned out, Miranda Harris died in a car accident 6 months after she left her kids at the orphanages. The saddest part was that shortly before her death, the unfortunate woman decided to take her kids back, since by that time she had already managed to pull herself together and find a good job. However, by an evil twist of fate, Miranda didn't have time to correct her mistakes, which she made due to her young age and inexperience. "So where is our brother then?" Megan asked hopefully. Fred Nelson smiled, and then, like a real magician, he pulled out a photograph from his desktop drawer, which had a young man in a military uniform on it. "Meet your brother, Patrick Clark, sergeant instructor at the Marine Corps base in the Paris Island training camp. I already contacted and brought Patrick up to speed, so he will be arriving tomorrow," the detective announced. Needless to say, the women had a very emotional reaction to all the news. In just half an hour, they got all the answers to all the questions that had been haunting their minds for many, many years. Now they will get to see their brother and visit the grave of their mother, who gave birth to them 25 years ago. Sean, Rachel, and Megan left the office of the private detective as relatives, who now had a whole life ahead of them, full of pleasant surprises and unexpected twists of fate. Looking at the joyful faces of the adults, Anna laughed merrily, which greatly pleased everyone. Their hearts simply trembled at the sound of her charming childish voice. Looking at this trio, it was safe to say that they would never part again and would take care of each other until the end of their days.